Good evening and welcome to tonight's Virginia 5th District Telephone Town Hall with Congressman Tom Garrett. My name is Matt and I'll be your MC for this evening. For those of you who would like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 now. Again, if you would like to ask a question of your congressman, please dial *3 now. And if you would like to sign up for our email e-newsletter list, please dial *6 at any time. We'd like to thank all of you for being with us this evening, and with that, I would like to turn it over to your representative in the United States Congress, Congressman Tom Garrett.
Hey, thanks, Matt, and thanks to everybody for joining in on this. I don't even know, I've lost track. I think it's something like our 43rd public forum and our 16th or 17th town hall. I really appreciate it. What we learned last time we did one of these in this format was that there's a little bit of spin-up time for the questions to start coming in, so I'm going to start off with just a little recap of the last week or so. Really honored to be asked by Florida Congressman Gus Bilirakis and I believe James Clyburn to join them as the co-chair of the Religious Freedom Caucus, which is a bipartisan group of, I think, about 55 members here in the House. It's very humbling as a freshman to receive that opportunity. It's a passion of ours to try to work to leverage American influence in the world to ensure that no one in the world has to go to sleep afraid for their safety based on their core beliefs, whether they're a Muslim in West China or a Christian in North Africa, whether they're a member of a tiny Jewish community in Egypt, or whether they're someone right here in the United States who in some way is persecuted. Jefferson understood that the role of government and the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment reflects is not to establish a religion nor to prohibit the free practice thereof, so long as people aspire to live peacefully alongside one another. And this is something that we've stood strong for, even pulling individuals out of prison in foreign countries who were persecuted for their belief, and so this is quite an honor. Also, it was very humbling to have had representatives to include the two ambassadors from the Czech Republic and Afghanistan, as well as the political officer from Azerbaijan to the University of Virginia last week to answer questions from students there with regard to the influence of the Declaration and Constitution on their governments. It's interesting to note that while we're a very young country, we do have the world's oldest functional constitution, or continually functional constitution, and so it's humbling as an American to hear emerging democracies like Afghanistan or countries that suffered under the jackbooted, oppressive regime of socialists and communists like the Czechs, who have now seen what freedom looks like, even if only the tip thereof, and who could speak to the influences of American foundations on their countries. So those are highlights. We hope to get back to UVA with ambassadors as well, probably in September. We've had interest from Ukraine, Great Britain, Liberia, Ghana, Brazil, Peru, and so it's a great honor to represent such a dynamic district in Congress, and this is something we look forward to doing. Also anticipate a trip with ambassadors to Longwood, probably in April, and there we will visit not only Longwood and Hampton-Sydney students at Longwood University, but also the Moton Museum, where in earnest the civil rights movement in Virginia began when it was Robert Russell Moton High School, and the 16-year-old girl named Barbara Johns initiated the only student-initiated case that was amalgamated into Brown versus Board of Education, thus kicking off the civil rights movement in Virginia. So great history, excited for these opportunities. I think we are ready to start taking questions. If you have a question, please press *3 to get into the queue. Also, if you'd like to subscribe to our e-newsletter, press *6. *3 to ask a question, *6 to get into the e-newsletter. And the first question is Jill in Chatham, Pennsylvania County. And go ahead, Jill.
Yes, sir. I am a conservative Christian. I just moved here from Georgia about a year ago, and was quite surprised to find, as a traditionally tobacco state, how we have not embraced the evolving public opinion of medicinal cannabis, and how the benefits have just been proven across the board, yet we are still being held back from it. I suffer from fibromyalgia with a laundry list of diseases or symptoms that go along with that have caused me to become disabled before 50. And I am in bed all the time, and I am chemically intolerant. I need help, and we have 28, 29 states that have embraced this, and I do not understand what the holdup of the government is, other than absolute greed by the pharmaceutical companies or control and regulations that we just can't seem to get past because of old school thinking, Jeff Sessions in particular.
Jill, thank you for your question. I'll tell you what, the silliest reason in the world to do something is because it's the way that it's always been done. And I have scoured the Constitution, and aside from a very tenuous interstate commerce argument, I can see no purview of the federal government as it relates to regulation of marijuana. It is completely within the ability of the states to regulate it. And I, as somebody who prosecuted for just under 10 years, am just incensed by the fact that we have laws on the books that we enforce sometimes and don't enforce other times. So we have a bill that would pass the responsibility for regulation to the states. I actually worked very closely with the champion of medical reform in the Virginia Senate, Democrat Dave Marsden. I consider him a good, close friend. In fact, I saw him and spoke with him for a while yesterday. I want you to understand that I, quite frankly, don't care so much about marijuana as I care about freedom and equal justice. If we have laws on the books where we enforce them in Virginia but don't enforce them in Colorado when they're federal law, then that is inherently unjust. I would say the justice that isn't blind isn't justice. That's number one. Number two, there is no constitutional purview of the federal government over this domain, again, absent of tenuous interstate commerce argument. Number three, I promise you the first time I ever heard the term medical marijuana that I laughed. But I'll tell you that having met literally hundreds of people, whether they're sufferers from fibromyalgia, whether they're people with terminal pain management issues, whether they're my colleagues in arms returning from the global war on terror who have PTSD situations, whether they're children with intractable epileptic seizures, or Kyle Turley, former NFL player, who's taken, they estimate, over 100 concussions and has stage 2 dementia at age 42. I believe that there are benefits. If you Google search medicines derived from plants, you will find hundreds and hundreds of different medicines, from aspirin from the willow tree all the way to anti-diarrheal, etc. So we should let people and their doctors make decisions for themselves. And finally, you make a good point. Calling from Chatham and an economy that has taken it on the chin with the loss of Burlington and Dan River Mills, textiles and furniture sort of packing up with a couple of noteworthy exceptions. Why are we importing nearly $1 billion worth a year of industrial hemp from Canada when we could grow it better and create jobs and economic opportunity right here in Virginia? There's no good answer. It's not about, it's not about marijuana so much as it is equal justice, about allowing individuals to make decisions for themselves, and about economic opportunity as it relates to hemp, which you can smoke all day and get nothing but a headache. It's not the same thing. And so we've worked, and I'm proud that on our Bill 1227, I think we've got, I believe we're at 27 co-sponsors with double figures, I think, from both parties. So I think it's a right thing sort of question, and we tried, again, if I wanted to stick my finger up in the wind and sort of calculate what, quote-unquote base voters want, I wouldn't be doing this. What I'm trying to do is what I think is right to the ends of justice and what's appropriate as it relates to the role of government at each particular level, and this is not a federal government issue. So next, I think on the line, and thank you, Jill, is Anthony from Charlottesville, and I think you got multiple part question.
Yeah, Congressman, I appreciate you taking my call. So I just want to applaud you first for the Student Security Act. I think it's a great idea, an innovative idea. But on the same line of that, I want to know what your opinion is of Trump's recent budget where he proposes to eliminate the public service loan forgiveness program.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I got to say, I'm not going to try to say what I think people want to hear. I'm going to say what I believe. The bulk of this president's agenda, I agree with. There are certain things that I think are glaring exceptions there too. That he wanted us to vote for the continuing resolution last week. I wouldn't. I think it's a little bit hypocritical to decry runaway spending when President Obama's in the White House and then not stand up for fiscal responsibility when he's not. And I'm not trying to be hypocritical. I'm trying to be consistent ideologically and in deed. It's sort of a dichotomous thing. I think people, the political tone these days is something that I lament as much as anything, right? And I know I'm tangentially sort of off track here, but I'll come back on. You got white powder sent to the residence of the mother-in-law of Donald Trump Jr. 2 days ago, and then I think today I saw that white powder was sent to President Obama's office. I don't know who did this, but if this is political in nature, then shame on us. Whatever happened to the days that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could be rivals and also be amicable with one another? So, but yeah, I'm not a sycophant for things that just because President Trump endorses them. Although again, I'll be clear, I do support the bulk of his agenda. And student security, real quickly. I want to be really clear. I've heard people mischaracterize this. It makes me very angry. That's part of the problem with the political discourse. No one is forced to do anything under student security. It's up to the individual whether they choose to participate, and not a single dime in benefits is affected for an individual who doesn't choose to enroll should this become the law. So I hope I covered. And Mary in Bedford is up next.
Yes.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I got you, Mary. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing well. First of all, I want to thank you on how approachable you are. The first time I met you at the primary convention, I was just blessed to get to know you and your soon-to-be wife at that time. But ever since, I just felt like we almost had a friendship, and I just appreciate it. And I see you on TV and with all these diplomats and dignitaries, and I'm thinking, and I talk to the man. So anyway, I thank you for being approachable and for really caring. You seem to really know your constituents in the concerns that we have. But my main call is about the Planned Parenthood investigation, and where is it? I was really surprised to see that the continuing resolution continued to fund that in spite of all the violations that we've already uncovered. And I know the investigation is ongoing, but should we really be continuing to fund them, considering that what we already know, and where is it going as far as you can see?
Well, I don't understand why we're subsidizing what's ostensibly a money-making entity, even if you remove the violations of acts that say that we don't traffic in the body parts of unborn children under law, right? So, I mean, literally Planned Parenthood is essentially tantamount to a for-profit. They clear plenty of revenue. Why our tax dollars subsidize it is beyond me.
Right, and then they turn around and give those subsidy dollars back to the Democrat Party, which to me it seems plain and clear money laundering. And why anybody hasn't jumped on that, I don't know.
Well, the government shouldn't be giving money to the NRA or to Planned Parenthood. Ultimately, we had a bill in Virginia that didn't pass, which blew my mind, that said we wouldn't give tax dollars to entities that paid to lobby. Right? Does it not make sense that we shouldn't use tax, whether it's right-leaning or left-leaning advocacy groups? And again, I'm even way beyond what's been uncovered by people who I think seem to want to look the other way. And I've got a very wide sort of libertarian swath in my belief structure, but I do believe it's the fundamental responsibility of government to defend life. And so if you believe that, then the question becomes, when does life begin? And if you believe that life begins at conception, then you should work to preserve life. I would also point out, and I think this absolutely bears repeating, that there is a disproportionate impact on people in socioeconomically challenging situations, on people of color, et cetera, on women, of abortion. And I will tell you, without getting too personal, that I have very close friends who I love very much who've been impacted directly by this, and it's not something that is it's impactful on a lot of different levels. So, but I don't think, candidly, that whether it's the NRA or Planned Parenthood or any entity that raises money on its own, that we should subsidize it with federal tax dollars if they're going to spend those very federal tax dollars to influence elections. It makes no sense to me.
Yes, exactly. And is there something that you can do, or a bill that can be introduced to get this to the forefront? I consider myself a grassroots lobbyist, and I have 5,000 friends on Facebook for that purpose, and I'd be willing to help push something through if I could.
Well, what I try to do, with a couple of exceptions, because I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, but I have a pretty good amount of judiciary background, which leads you to things like 1227. I am on Education and Workforce, which leads you to student security, but what I try to do is tailor my bills to my committee assignments, because your probability of success is a whole lot better at getting a bill out of the committee that you're on than a committee that you're not on. But I'll let my record and my willingness to speak very candidly and clear to a very large forum on this subject matter speak for itself. Having said that, what I'm happy to do, and you're welcome to reach out to our office, is recommend individuals who are on the particular committees that are relevant and speak directly with those individuals to see if I can get them to file bills. Now, I don't know how many bills we're co-patroning now, which may sound horrible, but the reason is I think it's up around 130-ish. I know I've got, and pardon me while I divert just again for a moment, I know I've got something like 43 different Democrat co-patrons on my bills. I'm co-patroning 130-some-odd bills. So there's no partisan angle here. I think the first bill we signed on to was actually Tulsi Gabbard's Stop Arming Terrorists Act. She's a Democrat from Hawaii. But I'm happy to work on it. I just, again, with a finite amount of bandwidth, think I need to focus, with some small exceptions, on things that are within the Ed and Workforce Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the Homeland Security Committee, because that's where I'm going to have the best chances for success. Mary, I'm going to move to a quick breather, because Matt's holding up a sign that says quick breather. And then I think, April, you're up next.
Right,
thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the rest of you for joining us this evening. For those of you who would like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 now. And for those of you who would like to join our email newsletter list, please dial *6 now. If your question hasn't been answered tonight, you can always visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact, and you can receive an email response on any of the Congressman's policy positions. For those of you who are on social media, you can visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/RepGarrett, or on Twitter at twitter.com/RepTomGarrett. And again, if you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett this evening, please dial *3 at any point during this conversation. And if you would like to join our email newsletter list, please dial *6 at any time. Again, that's *3 for questions and *6 for the email newsletter list. Congressman Garrett?
Okay, I want to also say I spoke with a gentleman named Jason Fuentes, I believe from Indivisible Charlottesville, while I was in Charlottesville a couple of weeks ago. He asked whether I'd file a bill to prohibit the mass collection of license plates by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We have the Plates Act in drafting right now. And now help me, or give me a little bit of latitude here, the Preventing License Plate Acquisition. And what it would do is, absent an articulable suspicion of a criminal act, it would forbid government entities from collecting your license plate every time you drive down the road. I think that's draconian and overly broad, so we told them we would. We should have a bill number on that hopefully within a week or two. And I candidly appreciate the suggestion. We are at 184 co-sponsored bills right now, so somebody just handed me that. So that's I try to, again, I mean, my goal is to be intellectually honest and consistent. Now, you know, this is America, so not agreeing with somebody is completely okay, but I need to be consistent with what I said I was going to do when I ran, and I think we're doing that. So, April and Appomattox.
Hey there. How are you doing tonight? I hope you got some water during your little break there.
I know. They tell me when I take breaks, April. I'm good.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for bringing servanthood back to your office. I really appreciate that. I appreciate your intelligence and being an obvious student of American history. I'm a student of global history, specifically the Ottoman Empire and all things related to Turkey. I want to ask you specifically about that. I understand that Tillerson is going to be meeting with Erdogan and his folks over there. We are at a very, very critical juncture with this global partner. They are the only image of democracy in the Muslim world. They have been our friends for many years, and I just fear that we are losing them. I traveled and worked over there and still have many friends there. I know that Senator Tim Kaine is also on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I will be meeting with him. So I guess what I'd like to say to you and to ask you, if I may, how can we stop this breakup? Because
I'll tell you what. We had scheduled a special order on Turkey this week. That's been moved because we're sort of refocusing on border security and immigration. But and by we, I mean me, our office. I am exceedingly concerned. You may be in the small minority, and I presume people who care enough to be on this call might as well, of Americans who are aware of the siege at Incirlik Air Base last year. In that situation, I believe it was close to 2 months where an American air base in Turkey was essentially surrounded. The power was cut off. We, unclassified, have, I believe, 60 nuclear devices on that facility. They had to fly in generator fuel to maintain air conditioning, to maintain those weapons safely. And had Erdogan given the order to crash the gates, you suddenly have another nuclear power. Now, historically, and if you go back to Kemal Ataturk and sort of the movement of the post-World War I, and even, I guess, Ataturk started, but Turkey has really sort of tried to integrate into the global community while holding on to their religious and cultural traditions. It's an amazing piece of the world. I am very troubled by the rhetoric from Erdogan. I think that anyone who says into a microphone unabashedly that he desires to have absolute exclusive executive power gives at least the thinking person cause to wonder where they're coming from. Having said that, we made it from 1945 through the end of the Cold War with the Turks as a steadfast, reliable ally. They've also been very, very historically accommodating to another democracy that's to the south and west in the nation of Israel. But I'm very concerned with where Turkey's going. The Incirlik siege really, really roiled me as a former American service member who had been stationed in 2 different countries overseas. And so I have to trust that Rex Tillerson and this administration appreciate the historical value of our friendship with Turkey. But I got to tell you that if I'm comprising a list of leaders that I would like to see go into retirement on the global stage, that Erdogan's on it. It's an interesting paradigm. Having said that, and I'll tell you, there was a lot with ISIS that had to do with avenues into Turkey. There's a lot of oppression of Kurds and by extension Alawites in Syria and Iraq that comes back to Turkey. The Turks are currently lobbying against our efforts to support the people who were on the forefront during the previous administration of the fight against ISIS by virtue of ongoing ethnic tensions between Turks and Kurds. So it's a dynamic region. I am not an Erdogan fan. I can't say that any more clearly. However, their friendship is something that's existed longer than I've been alive, and it's certainly worth trying to salvage. And Byron in Nelson.
Byron Altizer from Nelson. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. How are you, sir?
I'm doing okay tonight. How about yourself?
Well, I could complain, but then you might hear a huge explosion, and that would probably be God striking me with lightning. I'm doing well. That's been good to me.
Good. I appreciate your service. I am a retired service member, and my question.
What branch?
Excuse me?
What branch of the military, sir?
I served with the United States Navy.
Outstanding.
And my question is when is the federal government going to start taking care of us by giving us actual raises? And
so there is. Go ahead. Sorry.
They're standing behind that COLA thing with whatever Social Security gets. That's what we get.
And you're talking about retirees, not active duty military personnel. Am I correct?
Yes, I'm talking about retirees. I mean, can't they come up with something better, like when we were active? Remember how you used to get your step for every so many years of service?
Yes, sir. You know what? I don't see anything on the legislative calendar that speaks to that. I think that your phone call, candidly, and I'm not trying to blow sunshine, is a step in the right direction, because I hadn't really sort of given a lot of thought to increasing benefits for military retirees. There are a lot of bridges that need to be cleared before, candidly, I think we get to that. And here, for example, it took this government and this nation 20-some-odd years to recognize that while we might not understand the totality of the impact, there was a deleterious effect on health and well-being of Agent Orange, for example. I have friends who will tell you that Gulf War syndrome is real. I know that I got a lot of buddies who were in the armor component of the Army and the Marine Corps who spent an awful lot of time sitting on depleted uranium. It was very interesting. We just passed a bill that would fast track essentially FDA approval for medicines for service members, and it was an amazing balancing act because, yes, I want our military service personnel in the field to have all the protections they need as soon as they can get them. I also don't want to make the finest young men and women who volunteer to give of themselves to protect this great nation into guinea pigs for the pharmaceutical industry. Correct. Who I think rightly has been on the wrong side of history on a couple of occasions.
Yeah,
so this is something that I can't give you a direct line answer to, but at least I'm willing to admit that. But it's something we'll look into because I think you raised a good point.
Yeah, you raised a good point, too, because that's what they did. That's how they came up with the vaccine for the flu. The flu vaccine was used on us first.
Oh, it's not just that. There's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things. Yes, I know.
And some of them have been good, but not all of them have. And when I signed on that dotted line, I essentially signed to express a willingness to put my life on the line to defend something that was a lot bigger than me. But I didn't sign up to be a guinea pig for a pharmaceutical company. So it's a real balancing act.
I agree 100% with you there. But yeah, that and the costs, just the costs alone of our medical, dental, and eye care. I mean, they're.
So we're trying to, in our office, get together a panel of caregivers, doctors and nurses from VA facilities located in and around the 5th District. And I'm not on the Veterans Affairs Committee, but this is data that needs to be gathered to sort of sit down and say, what could we be doing differently? What could we be doing better? One of the things that I thought was interesting in the Army when I was in was we essentially had a suggestion box where you could put in either credited to yourself or anonymously a suggestion on how to save money, prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, how to do maintenance better or train better or what have you. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not concerned with who gets the credit. So these are things that are perpetually on the radar. I got to tell you, I had not given a whole lot of thought to how to create a sliding scale on veterans benefits. And Matt's holding up the magical sign again that says quick breather. So apparently I'm supposed to breathe.
Well, you take care tonight, and it's been wonderful listening to you.
Thank you, sir. And Steve, you'll be up after Matt.
Thank you, Stephen. We greatly appreciate it. Well, thank you, everybody who has tuned in this evening. If you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 at any point during tonight's telephone town hall meeting. Again, that's *3 if you'd like to ask a question of your congressman, and *6 if you'd like to subscribe to our weekly email newsletter list. For those of you who haven't had your question answered this evening, please feel free to visit 24/7, 365 www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact, where you can find information about calling our office, emailing us, or speaking with one of our constituent service representatives who can help you cut through any of the red tape with any federal agencies. With that, we'd like to turn it over to our next caller.
Steve from Prince Edward, I think.
Hi, Congressman. First of all, I'd like to say I didn't know you served in the military, so thank you for your service. After that,
I was a fire support field artilleryman, so whatever you say it slowly and loud.
Yes, sir. Well, I kind of recently learned about your work with refugees, and honestly, it seems kind of random from a congressman in the 5th District inland in the middle of Virginia. So I was wondering how you got interested in that and what you've done with it so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve, we've never met before, I don't think, and this is not a staged call, but I'm really glad you asked. My wife, who's an amazing woman, is fluent in Czech, fluent in German. She lived in Europe for 9 years. She played in a band, and she has an affinity for the Czech Republic, having lived there for a number of years. That wasn't her entirety of time in Europe. There's a Czech pastor named Peter by American pronunciation, Petr Jášek, who was held in a Sudanese prison for giving aid to Christian minority communities in Sudan. And right after we were sworn in, she saw on Facebook, of all places, a post about Jášek and his imprisonment in Khartoum. She essentially came to me and said, "You have to do something." We found ourselves on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I have a real affinity for human rights and basic human dignity. I'm not trying to foist an American worldview on all peoples. I just think that you should be able to believe as you choose without fear of repercussion. I think that's a basic human right, and I think the United States shouldn't be doing business with countries that turn their backs on basic human rights. So I didn't know exactly what to do. I found a number of other members of Congress who were interested in the Jášek case, and then we worked, and I'm going to try to condense this, to help free Petr Jášek. So he was freed relatively early on. We had some work with the Czech government as it relates to getting Jášek out, which is how I came to know the Czech ambassador very well. And ultimately, we learned that he had two colleagues who were Sudanese nationals. And as soon as Jášek was freed, the other members of Congress, for the most part, kind of said, okay, mission accomplished. But the Sudanese ambassador's office called us and said, we'd like you to tell the administration that we were cooperative in the case of Mr. Jášek. And I said, well, and this is after I'd learned of Pastor Hassan and Abdulmanamum and their families who'd also been oppressed. And I said, I'm happy to do that if you will release the Sudanese nationals, and I'm going to secure refugee visas for them to come to the United States, which is interesting because ostensibly Sudan was on the travel ban list, which is a misnomer. It's a heightened vetting list, which is evidenced by the fact that 9 Sudanese are now Sudanese American. And so they were very taken aback by the fact that I knew about the Sudanese who were imprisoned ostensibly for giving food and medical aid to members of the minority community there. And they said, well, we might be able to work with you. Would you come to Sudan? I went to the Foreign Affairs Committee. The senior civilian on the Foreign Affairs Committee said, no way, no how, you're going to Sudan. I said, watch me. We ultimately raised a lot of private money and then worked with State Department and Immigration and Customs Enforcement to get visas for these 9 folks. We got the 7 family members over, and then I think in September I went to Dulles and met these 2 pastors who really at any time could have just renounced their faith, but no person of any faith should ever have to renounce their faith. and they never did. They sat in a prison that we can, as Americans, I think, really comprehend. I will give some credit to the Sudanese government for being willing to work with us. But, you know, there was a time a year ago when I was very frustrated with how things worked here, with my perceived inability to accomplish things that I thought really mattered. And a lot of that fell by the wayside when I was able to walk up to these two gentlemen who at that point in time had no idea who I was. We traveled to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and subsequently to Khartoum, and met with a number of people from the Sudanese government, the U.S. Embassy, et cetera, even though we had to do it all with private money. And it started meaning something. So, you know, sometimes you find your passion, and sometimes your passion finds you. Whether it's the Falun Gong, who've been subject to organ harvesting in China, whether it's the Rohingya in Myanmar, whether it's the Christian minority in Iraq and Syria, which was in Iraq alone was well over 1 million 10 years ago, and is now about 250,000. I mean, you think about that. That's genocide and diaspora on a scale that you'd think you'd see on the nightly news. These are things that matter in the world, and so they matter to me. And it's really neat that even though it's hard to pass a bill, if you have a dogged determination and a work ethic, you can get things done to help people. What we did with Yashik that was different than the other members was I didn't just write a letter and sign it. I wrote a letter, I signed it, I got in the car, I drove to the Sudanese embassy, I walked up the sidewalk, I knocked on the door. They said, you know, they were on the state sponsors of terrorism list. They said, we haven't had an American member of Congress here in a decade. I said, well, here I am. These people need to be set free. And it's, you know, it's about sort of identifying something that you can affect change on and then busting your butt to do it. And that's the 5th District, right? That's Barbara Johnson, Booker T. Washington. That's Thomas Jefferson and Justice Marshall. And so I'm a shadow. I'm nothing compared to those people, but by gosh, I want to make a difference. So it's great to have a chance to do it. Jim, and it says location unknown. Jim, lumber exports. Okay, Mike? Jim or Mike? Mike? Can we patch through a caller who can identify themselves? Is anybody there?
Mike from Franklin County. I have a question for my congressman.
All right, Mike, how are you?
Pretty good. What's going on in Congress right now about the infrastructure of this country?
Well, President Trump released the specifics on his infrastructure bill, I think, yesterday. At the top of my list is the I-73 corridor. Obviously would impact Henry and Franklin. If you've ever driven I-73 through North Carolina to the Virginia line, it's almost embarrassing.
Yes.
I really believe that high-speed internet and that sort of thing are important, but four-lane highways and railroad offings, particularly in Southside, are how we bring 21st century clean manufacturing jobs in. Cumberland County, which I've represented for, I think, almost 7 years now, is a dynamic county with wonderful people, but they got fiber optic cable right down the middle of that county. What they don't have is I think 2 miles of four-lane highway in the entire county. So we were working on trying to get I-60 corridor set up like 58 has been to expand the capability on this infrastructure bill. A lot of how I end up going is going to be whether or not myself and Bob Goodlatte and Morgan Griffith and Virginia Fox and some folks in West Virginia can ensure that we get the infrastructure money we need to complete that I-73 corridor. I will also give a hat tip to State Senator Bill Stanley, who has been dogged on I-73 and the infrastructure and development that it'll bring to his Senate district. So that's what I'm looking for. I got to tell you, we're still parsing details, and essentially what I've done is spoken to leadership because I will not, I tell everybody as it relates to whipping on votes, I'm not going to kiss on the first date. I want to understand exactly the impacts of particular legislation, and so, I guess a good example of that would be historical redevelopment tax credits, which have helped Charlottesville and Warrenton and Danville, and when we were looking at tax reform, I joined a coalition of probably 25 members saying, just because we're trying to simplify the code doesn't mean we need to get rid of things that actually work. If you're in Danville, Pennsylvania, you can walk down Craghead today and choose, one of a handful of nice restaurants to eat at. There's office space and apartments. That's all historical redevelopment tax credits. Same in Victoria, Virginia, by golly. I mean, it's all over. So on infrastructure, for me, I want to see if we can get something done on 73. And so that's again, I don't know where I'm going to go on it, but that's the message we're trying to send. It was Shelley in Keswick, Albemarle County, or are you in Fluvanna, Keswick? We've lost Shelley.
No,
Shelley?
here.
All right, we haven't lost Shelley. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. When you were running for office, you made statements about the problems of student debt, and that's one of the reasons I voted for you. But it's at 6% plus when our prime rate is so low. Is there something we can do about this? I know it's based on an international 14-bank LIBOR rate, but it's greater than the credit card debt in this country, and it doesn't seem to it's not being addressed.
So, no, we have the bill. I mean, I filed the bill I said I would file when I ran. It's called Student Security. What it would do is allow up to about $40,100 of student loan debt to be exchanged for delayed receipt of Social Security benefits. It would force no one to do anything. It would let people choose. I'll tell you that I have $55,000 worth of student loan debt myself. I aspire to be customer number one of Student Security. I would absolutely sign up. But here's how this works. There's a lot of things going on at once that are all bad. I think the number two asset on the government's books is student loan debt, which creates a perverse sort of reverse incentive to solving this problem. But again, Student Security, Google search Student Security. There have been a number of articles written on it to include, I think, a Washington Times editorial. There was a Fox News panel the other day where both the Democrat panelists and the Republican panelists said, why aren't there more ideas like this? Here are some underlying facts. I'm going to back up on that. 90% of student loan debt holders hold less than $40,000. So this would eliminate all debt of people who chose to avail themselves of it, of 90% of student loan debt holders. 90% of defaulters have under $5,000 in debt. That means that 90% of people who default on their payments could avoid that default by delaying Social Security receipt for about 10 months, just under. And so we're putting our money where our mouth is. We've shopped this bill repeatedly. The leadership, I've sat down with a number of my Democrat colleagues trying to find co-sponsors for this bill. It is alive and well and one of the keystones of sort of our legislative process. I get so angry when people mischaracterize this because it does not change a single thing for anyone who doesn't choose to participate. It doesn't change. My mother relies in part upon her Social Security benefit that she worked a long time awfully hard to earn. What it does is allow people a choice, and that's what freedom looks like. And yes, ma'am, I've carried that. If you Google search student security, or if you Google search Garrett student security, you'll find some pretty detailed descriptions. It's again, I mean, aside from people who don't trust individuals to make decisions for themselves, I haven't seen any sort of good argument against it. But here's why you do it. It's not pandering. The most creative generation is always the youngest generation. It was the most creative generation when I was young was the youngest generation. When you were young was the youngest generation. 500 years ago was the youngest generation. And when you saddle young people with obstructive debt, then they can't buy homes, they can't buy cars, they can't move out, they can't get married, they can't have kids. But most importantly, they can't start businesses. And in an America where we don't build as much product as we used to, what we still lead the world in is ideas. And those ideas historically come from young people. If we can get these young people out from underneath this debt, then we can have a better, more vibrant, more opportunity-laden America, and that's what we should all be working towards. I'm going to go to another Byron, this time in Danville. Byron.
Brian.
Oh, Brian. Okay.
Yeah.
We have
yes,
there, including myself. There are at least 3 dyslexic people in the office.
Yes. Well, I want to say thank you for taking my call. And
well, it's my pleasure, and I wish we could get some more.
Yeah. My question is, I live here in the South Side, Virginia, Danville, Virginia, around this area, and I was wondering if you know about any jobs or potential things coming here to make more advancement developments in the South Side areas.
Well, one of them in Gretna, which is obviously up the road a ways in Pennsylvania, but in the Danville region, is Amthor that just opened recently. I think 96, I believe, jobs, and they already intend to expand. Piedmont Precision Machining in Danville, Pennsylvania area, I met with not too terribly long ago. They're very excited about the opportunity to capitalize their new equipment investment, which will allow them to hire more folks. Kyocera's partnership with Southside Virginia Community College and Averett University is yielding some benefits. I also spoke today with a tech firm that wants to install essentially a supercomputer to rival that at the National Laboratory at Lawrence Livermore, and they have Danville on their short list. This would be something we hope will come to fruition probably October, November of this year. But that's it. I mean, the key in Southside is getting back those jobs we lost when Roy Hill and Burlington and Dan River Mills and Lane all left. And we're constantly sort of pitching. We have a lot of concrete and roof and infrastructure space tragically available, and we're always trying to get folks to come down to Appomattox all the way through Henry and Brunswick and take a look at some of these areas. But there are a couple of good ones, Amthor and Piedmont Precision. We can talk about a couple more that I don't want to poison the deal on the front end. And I got Matt telling me to take a quick breather.
Well, thank you, everybody, for continuing to join us as we head into the 8 o'clock hour here. We'd like to thank everybody who has had the opportunity to call in thus far. If you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Garrett, please dial *3 at any time, or *6 at any time if you'd like to sign up to join our email newsletter list. For those of you who haven't had your question answered this evening, you're always welcome to visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact, and that will give you all the available resources to contact our office, whether it's you're having trouble with a federal agency, whether you'd like to discuss with Congressman Garrett how you would like him to vote on a particular issue, or if you'd like to come and tour any of the facilities in Washington, D.C., including the United States Capitol, the Supreme Court building, any of the Smithsonian institutions, as well as the White House. Again, if you would like to follow Congressman Tom Garrett on social media, you can reach him on Facebook at facebook.com/RepGarrett, or on Twitter at twitter.com/RepTomGarrett. And if you'd like to ask a question for the remainder of this evening's program, please dial *3 at any point.
First I want to thank Matt and the team. Again, if you do have issues, whether it's Social Security, Veterans Affairs, etc., we've got wonderful, wonderful people on the team. Esther Page in Charlottesville, Denise Van Valkenburg in Danville, and Holly Pence and Matt up here. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We are very persistent. Ingrid in Nelson County. Ingrid.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. How are you?
Yes. Fine, thanks. How are you?
I can't rightly complain.
Okay. My husband and I wanted to thank you for voting against that spending. We sent you to Washington to try to get rid of the debt, and we're not quite understanding why we're spending more money, and thank you for voting against that. If I understand correctly, that was your opinion.
Yes, ma'am, I did. It's again, I said earlier in the call, it's really hypocritical when people criticize the previous administration for profligate spending and then sign on the dotted line for profligate spending. And I'm not going to be that person. I tend to agree with a lot of the initiatives of this administration. I don't think we needed that spending increase. I do believe there was a pathway to success through both chambers whilst maintaining some sort of fiscal responsibility. But we march on.
Well, we saw it on WSCT. We're watching TV, and you voted against it. We're sitting in the living room, so thank you for doing that. But my question is about education. I'm a teacher. I'm a retired teacher, but I'm still teaching part-time. What role should the federal government be playing in education?
Well, that's a wonderful question. There's actually, until after I was born, there was a very limited federal responsibility as it related to public ed. Now, the Constitution of Virginia rightly says that it's the responsibility of the Commonwealth to provide an education for the children in the Commonwealth, right? Currently, we take a lot of money from localities. I always joke that I'm a big government conservative. What I mean by that is I don't think we're spending entirely too much. I think we're spending entirely too much at the wrong levels, right? If you want to see efficient use of money, spend it in Nelson County, spend it in Pennsylvania, spend it in Franklin, because the farther money has to travel from the point at which it's collected, and Jefferson spoke to this, the more money that's lost in transit. So to the extent that we've created a rubric wherein the federal government has a funding role, I suppose that by virtue of nature it's now appropriate. We don't want to yank the rug out from underneath of anybody. Having said that, there's a reverse correlation in American educational achievement versus the world, which Virginia shouldn't be competing against 49 other states and territories in the District of Columbia. Virginia should be competing against the world with federal sort of delving into the education question. So I'd like to see a similar amount of money spent, but I'd like to see decisions made in your counties and in your state. That creates a circumstance wherein you get 50 laboratories for democracy, if you'll pardon the sort of glomming onto a cliche. And that's going to get the best outcomes. What we're going to see then is what state does what that works best. One of the things I was really, really proud of in the state Senate, which I would say sort of mirrors the humanitarian efforts we've engaged in Congress, because I didn't go to the state Senate to do K-12 ed reform, but I carried as a chief patron one of the bills that rolled back the SOL burdens. Now, I like accountability. I like standards, but I don't like testing students into oblivion and hamstringing creative teachers' ability to engage students who might learn differently. So I would power those decisions down. I think the most important role of the federal government under the current paradigm is funding, not dictating policy from on high. Having said that, if we could leave the money in Nelson County, in Pennsylvania, in Franklin, in Albemarle, in Fluvanna, they're going to make good decisions. The difference between yourself, Ingrid, as a teacher, and the Secretary of Education is you actually know the kids in your classroom. You know the challenges they face. You know the unique abilities they have. And in Washington, we deal in sort of a cookie-cutter macro. That doesn't get you the best results. So I want to see good government funding of education. I just think it should be done closer to the student and not farther away. Greg, and I got location unknown. Greg.
Yes, sir.
Where are you calling from, sir?
I'm calling from Charlottesville.
Outstanding. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question is about health insurance for self-employed people. Recently, until Obamacare was repealed, we were able to get health insurance for a family for about $1,100 for self-employed people. This year, it went up to about $3,000. And that basically prevents people from going into entrepreneurship. And I'd like to find out what we collectively can do about it. In this area, particularly in Charlottesville, I think that it's the worst because pretty much every insurer, bar one, left the market. And we can opine about the reasons why they left the market, but I'd like to find out what solutions you can propose.
Well, we don't have to opine. We know why they left the markets. I mean, United Healthcare, Kaiser, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem all supported the Affordable Care Act, which has not, by the way, been repealed. I don't know that President Trump's repealing of the subsidies, and I stress the word subsidies because subsidy implies taking money from somebody and moving it somewhere else, was the best maneuver. But the Affordable Care Act is the root of the problem ultimately because we've seen the number of entities in the healthcare providing field cut nearly in half. We've seen United Healthcare stock, last time I looked, go up sixfold. In other words, the health insurance companies that supported Obamacare have been the really big winners. And you've seen the hardest hit region in the entire nation be a region full of creative idea people in Charlottesville, Albemarle, and surrounding counties. Now, the reason Optima's the only provider isn't because Optima's in bad shape. What they've done is the big providers have muscled out everybody on the fringe and all the competition, and they've monopolized markets under the paradigm created by the Affordable Care Act, where before the subsidy was withdrawn, we've seen a 100% increase in individual plans and a 140% increase in family plans. So the answer, I think, isn't to go back to the way we did it before. It's to create a circumstance wherein you sideloize money, that is, you set aside a pool of money to make sure that those most vulnerable among us with pre-existing conditions or at a heightened risk have health care. Then you push the rest of the people into something closer to a free market paradigm, allowing for shopping of insurance plans across state lines and allowing for individuals to choose which benefits they want to pay for and which they don't, and you'll see the cost pushed down. But the Affordable Care Act hasn't been repealed, and essentially it was the precursor that led to the halving, that is cutting in half nearly, of the pool of healthcare providers, which has driven the cost to the consumer in Charlottesville and Albemarle and everywhere in the country, like Pinal County, Arizona. I don't think there are any healthcare providers right now up, but driven the bottom line of the big insurance companies that supported President Obama's plan through the roof. And you can't argue with the numbers, right? I mean, ultimately, it's a really good time to be in big healthcare. And if you're a thinking person, you have to ask yourself, why did Kaiser, why did Optima, why did Anthem and United Health all support President Obama's Affordable Care Act? Well, we've seen it. Again, United Healthcare stock up sixfold. Well, nothing else is doing that. So we need more competition. We need more entry into the marketplace. We need to let individuals pick which benefits are important to them. And we need to make sure that we have a safety net for individuals in the high-risk pool and not treat every single American the same, which has been the paradigm under the ACA, which is what's driven the cost through the ceiling. So the question is, will members of Congress in an atmosphere where there's so much misinformation muster the courage to do those things? And candidly, I wish I could be more optimistic, but that's where we are. So, RT in Fluvanna.
First of all, I want to commend you on the work you did in Sudan. Thank you very much. Okay, and to go along with that, what is being done to extricate those 3 Americans from North Korea? There are several in Iran and other places around the world. What is being done? First of all, I think Pence should have spoken to Kim's sister and said, release those 3 Americans.
Well, it's an interesting balancing act that Vice President Pence has, and it's really troubling to see some in the American media glamorizing the sister of Kim Jong-un.
Amen.
They literally sell their citizens into slavery. I'll say that again. It's 2018. North Korea literally sells its own citizens into slavery. What they do is if a country needs a rail spur completed and they need cheap labor, the North Koreans will get them 1,000 workers, and then they'll have that country remit those workers paid directly to the government of North Korea. It doesn't go to the people who do the work. They're shipped off against their will and forcibly put into labor, and we shouldn't do business with any country that is in the slave trade. And to think about that is mind-numbing. I'll tell you that I've had honor to meet the parents of Otto Warmbier. I don't even have words for that tragedy. And again, earlier, if you recall, when I was talking about the Sudanese, I said I have to give some credit to the Sudanese for being willing to talk. We have Americans detained in Iran. We have Americans detained in North Korea. There are Americans in questionable circumstances in Turkey, going back to a previous call. The Sudanese are trying, even though they still have Omar al-Bashir as their head of state, to reintegrate into the world community. They worked with, interestingly, the Chinese to develop their rail infrastructure when the United States and General Electric pulled out in the late 90s, and the Chinese couldn't get the trains to run as well as American companies could, which kind of makes me proud. But because the Sudanese wanted to work with us, it made it easier for me to get the results that we wanted. The North Koreans, I think it's wonderful that those athletes from North Korea marched alongside those from South Korea, but make no mistake, Kim, as well as his father and his father's father, have always played nice on one side whilst doing exactly the opposite on the other. If you need evidence of that, President Clinton in the mid-1990s strode to a podium after the Korean nuclear deal and said this ends any threat of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula, and you see where we are right now. So it's a whole lot harder, and we don't think we haven't thought about it. And another one that we've talked about internally is Dr. Afridi, who helped us capture or kill bin Laden, and he's being detained in Pakistan. But it's a little bit different animal negotiating with the North Koreans than it is with the Sudanese. Having said that, we are perpetually looking for the opportunity. There's some middle ground in places like Myanmar and China where I think we're able to affect good outcomes for human rights and basic human dignity. But it's very tough working with the North Koreans. And I want everybody on this call to take this away. I don't think we need to get into sort of moral equivalency. There have been some horrible ills, 100 million deaths at the hand of communism, Nazism, horrific 6 million Jewish people and millions of others during the Second World War. But North Korea is right up there with Pol Pot and Idi Amin. They're just bad actors. It is so hard to talk to the parents of Otto Warmbier and try to make sense of how an amazing young person, young bright future could be snuffed out at the hands of despotic totalitarianism. And don't look at your Olympics tonight for 1 second and think that Kim's sister is anything less than the pleasant face of an evil, evil, evil regime.
Well, thank you very much for that, Congressman. For those of you still on the line this evening, if you haven't had your answer or an answer to your question, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact, and you'll be able to either send our office an email or you can reach us by telephone. For those of you on social media, you can visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/RepGarrett or twitter.com/RepTomGarrett. Again, we'd like to thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and it appears that we've got time for just one last call.
I think I got Joe in Charlotte, and then I'm going to try to do Patricia after Joe because I like to frustrate Matt. So he said one call. So Joe, Charlotte County.
Congressman Garrett, I want to let you know I really appreciate everything that you've done for us. I'm from Charlotte County, which is very, very rural, as well as I'm a police chief in the town of Broadnax, and that's where I met you at before you were elected.
Yes, sir.
I would love to see some emphasis put on Charlotte County and the 360 bypass, or not the 360 bypass, but the 360 highway. I feel like it's a great area to develop for business industry, because right now we're steadily losing our young people because we have very little, if anything, to offer them. And it's kind of like you were speaking about the fiber optic system. We had it run through the county, and that's exactly what happened. It went through. Nothing was done to provide service to the people and the county as a whole. And I made.
Well, you almost. I know I'm cutting you off. I'm almost doing it on purpose because you asked a question and then started to give my answer. I had a bill in the state Senate that would allow the top graduates of every public high school in Virginia to go to school at the closest regional university. Now, we exempted Tech, William & Mary, and UVA because they're essentially international institutions. We accepted VMI and then the HBCUs because they're special mission universities, which left us with Longwood, Christopher Newport, JMU, Radford, George Mason, UVA Wise, etc. But it would have allowed the top graduates at each public high school to go to a accredited regional university essentially for free. And the reason is the engine behind economic development is creativity. And these young, I grew up in Louisa County, not in the 5th District, okay? I went to Louisa High School. And we all couldn't wait to get out of there. And then we all wanted to move back by the time we were 30 because we realized that it was a wonderful place to raise a family. And a lot of my friends couldn't find jobs. So the first thing we need to do is a dereg on the federal end to allow for access locally to that fiber optic cable that runs through Charlotte and runs through Cumberland, because right now there are people who would try to exploit that to create high-speed rural broadband that can't get to it because the regulatory climate stinks. The other thing is high-speed internet is not a panacea. Again, even though it's the 21st century, you know, the 360 corridor is important, but I got to tell you, compared to 360 or compared to 60, 360 is an internet highway or is a super highway. So, we need to look at real rail offings and 4-lane highways because you're not going to get any light clean manufacturing in areas that aren't, the 58 corridor in Virginia is a big deal across South Side. We have a really, really good thing going for us in the 5th District and across rural Virginia, and that is that in a world where one of the things that employers lament is the lack of soft skills, showing up to work on time, not getting in fights with your coworkers, etc. We still say please and thank you and sir and ma'am and treat each other with basic dignity, and that's honest to goodness something that's in demand. We've talked to a computer or a technology firm that's currently in Loudon about getting down towards they're looking not in Charlotte tragically, but specifically in Appomattox, Pennsylvania, and Campbell areas because they're having trouble finding folks that'll work for $28 an hour and full health benefits and 2 weeks paid vacation in Loudon. I said, well, I know a place where people will do that. But again, the regulatory climate that doesn't allow us to exploit the fiber optic internet that's already in our communities needs to be revisited. We need traditional infrastructure. That a lot of that's going to be a state responsibility, but the federal government certainly needs to help on the funding side because it's constitutionally appropriate for the funding of roads. And again, we need to look at the educational paradigm. It galls me to see the valedictorian from Lunenburg High School go to college in North Carolina. I mean, we can keep them close to home if we incent that, and if we build infrastructure, then the brilliance that is our young people, it doesn't matter what they look like, how they, what color their skin is, that it stays close to home, and that the benefits of that brilliance is reaped close to home. I'm incredibly proud to have had the privilege of a rural upbringing, and there's real value in the communities that we have, but we need to compete on a level playing field, and as the population shifts, so too do the votes. And in the Virginia Senate in particular, golly, I think there's 40 members of the Virginia Senate, and I want to say something like 15 of them have got a piece of Northern Virginia. So you can start to do the math on that. Us folks in ROVA, or rest of Virginia, as I call it, we carried this state for a long time. We got great people. We need to make sure we stand up and fight for our opportunities as well. And Patricia in location unknown. I think you are, according to Matt, our last call, and we're going to do another one of these in March, and we'll have a radio town hall here within the next couple of weeks on WCHV, and hopefully we're working on getting affiliate stations across the district, but the CHV is available on the TuneIn app. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I am. And how are you?
I can't rightly complain.
Well, good. Glad to hear that. I'm interested in the outcome of the feasibility study into the production of hemp in Virginia as an agricultural product.
Well, so and this is, I like the question. There's been a bipartisan move in the General Assembly of Virginia and I think led by Morgan Griffiths before I got to Congress, in Congress, to sort of allow our farmers another crop. Now, while I think there are some interesting upsides and downsides to any sort of crop rotation, it's undeniable that hemp does a lot for the soil, it does a lot for the air, and it daggone sure does a lot for the farmer who sends their child to Virginia Tech to learn to take over the farm when it pays the tuition. Again, we're importing. Last I looked, well over $500 million annually in hemp for the production of textiles from Canada. Other countries are importing far more than that because, as we all know too well, our textile industry is kind of taking it on the chin. The geographical and climatological factors that undergird the successful cultivation of hemp lend themselves to Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky essentially being the French wine region of hemp cultivation in the world. And there is, again, hemp is not marijuana. It's the cousin of marijuana, but the THC content is such that it's not something you smoke recreationally. Why on earth can't our farmers grow it? Why on earth, when we've been battered by bad news economically for 30 years, can't we put another arrow in the quiver of those who seek to just, that small family farm is a small business, and the children that benefit from the sweat of their moms and dads, they're no different than the kids in Northern Virginia whose folks work at the Pentagon or for a tech firm. So I can't see a reason not to do it. And again, I mean, in an era where people want to see bipartisanship, here's an issue where everybody knows it's the right thing. I'm extraordinarily frustrated with sort of the gatekeeper process. You can't pass a bill if the bill doesn't get voted on. The bill doesn't get voted on if the subcommittee chair doesn't bring it up, and the subcommittee chair can vote on it and pass it, but the committee chair won't bring it up, and that's ridiculous. I just, certain things make sense. This makes sense. It's not some great evil, and by the way, if the federal government withdraws from its overreach, I'm quite confident the Commonwealth of Virginia can insert appropriate regulations in its place. So I'm convinced there are real benefits to hemp cultivation. I'd like to see it be more readily available.
Well, thank you very much for that call, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. For those of you who didn't get your question answered this evening, please visit www.tomgarrett.house.gov/contact to get our office locations, telephone numbers, as well as our email address where you can reach us to have your question answered. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for inviting us into your homes on this, our third town hall meeting of 2018. Thanks, everyone, and have a beautiful week. Goodbye.